Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the April 27th California Citizens Redistricting Commission meeting. I'm Alicia Fernandez. I'm the chair for this meeting, and my fellow commissioner Isra Ahmad is the vice chair. First thing is please take roll call.
Thank you. Commissioner Ahmad,
Here.
Commissioner Akutagawa, Commissioner Anderson,
Here.
Commissioner Fernandez,
Here.
Commissioner Foranshari,
Here.
Commissioner Kennedy,
Here.
Commissioner Lamont, Commissioner Sadwani,
Here.
Commissioner Sinai,
Here.
Commissioner Taylor,
Present.
Commissioner Toledo,
Here.
Commissioner Turner,
Here.
Commissioner Vasquez.
Here.
You have a quorum, Chair.
Did you get Commissioner Yee?
I'm sorry, Commissioner Yee.
Here.
And Commissioner Lamont is also here.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. In terms of action taken yesterday during closed session, the commission did take action to move forward with one of our director of outreach candidates. So we're still going through that process. And so that's all for that. I also wanted to thank those that viewed our Spanish presentation last night at 5 o'clock. So thank you for that. And then before I go to public comment, I just want to give everyone a roadmap of the schedule for the next few days. So today we will have an LGBTQ panel at 1:15, at approximately 1:15. Then at approximately 3 o'clock, we'll have a demographic shift panel. And after that panel, we will adjourn to closed session, and we do not anticipate coming back tonight. Tomorrow, we will resume in closed session, and we will not return to open session, and that will be at noon. At 4 o'clock tomorrow p.m., there's a public input design committee. Then on Thursday at 9:30 a.m., we will return to open session. And at that point, we'll remain in open session. We'll address the remaining agenda items. At the conclusion of our meeting, the Legal Affairs Committee will meet. And please review our website for any updates to that information. And with that, if we can go to public comment, Katie.
Yes, Chair. I will read the instructions, and to all of those called in, remember to press *9 to raise your hand. In order to maximize transparency and public participation in our process, the commissioners will be taking public comment by phone. To call in, dial the telephone number provided on the live stream feed. It is 877-853-5247. When prompted, enter the meeting ID number provided on the live stream feed. It is 981-9980-2683 for this meeting. When prompted to enter a participant ID, simply press the pound key. Once you have dialed in, you'll be placed in a queue. To indicate you wish to comment, please press *9. This will raise your hand for the moderator. When it is your turn to speak, you will hear a message that says the host would like you to talk and to press *6 to speak. If you would like to give your name, please state and spell it for the record. You are not required to provide your name to give public comment. Please make sure to mute your computer or live stream audio to prevent any feedback or distortion during your call. Once you are waiting in the queue, be alert for when it is your turn to speak, and again, please turn down the live stream volume. And we do have several callers in the queue, and I will begin opening up the lines.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Dylan Johnson with SEIU California. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Terrific. Well, first and foremost, I just want to thank the council for the opportunity to give public comment today. Again, my name is Dylan Johnson. I'm with SEIU California. I'm calling on behalf of our organization and our over 700,000 members here in California. So I wanted to call in regards to item 9A that was on the agenda. It was titled Impact of Census Delay on CRC Calendar and Election Cycle. It's our understanding that the Redistricting Commission is continuing its discussions around the deadline to adopt its final maps. Just wanted to raise a few concerns that we have on our end. So as a organization, SEIU California, we are continually working to engage and mobilize voters around elections. And it has been consistently our experience, and position that any change in primary dates can lead to a lot of voter confusion and voter disenfranchisement. So we are particularly concerned with the idea of moving back the June primary date. The June primary is held through the first week in June, and so to move this back by a couple weeks, it would be something that virtually no California voter has experience with. And so we really see this, this is going to impact 22 million registered voters here in California. And we are concerned that this would potentially confuse and worst case disenfranchise voters here in California. So we see this as a very big deal and as something that should be viewed as a last resort as opposed to the first option. So really wanted to hit on that. And I know there is concern, and we've raised concern around having the redistricting process overlap with the holidays. And that's where some of this concern and thought of moving it out is coming from. That's obviously not an ideal situation, but we do think that there are steps that can be taken to mitigate the impacts of this process taking place over the holidays. So, just some of our suggestions to the commission we wanted to present, potentially requesting additional supplemental outreach funds, really keying in on the schedule to avoid key dates that would be problematic around the holidays. And if needed, asking for a short extension of time in order to avoid, moving that primary date or forcing voters to cast their ballot on a date that's unfamiliar. We really have seen this commission roll up their sleeves and do a lot of work to respond to the challenges presented by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we know that, this commission is obviously very capable of tackling these issues. And so we really advocate that we, address it in the same kind of way and see this as a challenge that is definitely manageable. And we have some time before this data comes out, and the commission has a lot that it can do and has been doing in order to prepare for when that data is released. So, not just conducting the public. Thank you. Not just conducting the public input, but continuing the debate and discussions around the Voting Rights Act. And so, this commission has been doing tremendous work and has been doing a lot of outreach. And so I think in this intervening time ahead of the data, there's a lot that can be done and is being done by the commission. And we thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson, for your feedback. Invite the next one in, Katie, please.
Just a point of clarity, Chair. We do have quite a few callers. Do you want us to enforce the 3 minutes and give warnings? I didn't get a clear direction on that.
Yeah, yes, I appreciate that. Thank you so much, because we do have a panel that is waiting.
Very good. And just to confirm, the time is 3 minutes?
Right. So all the callers know that we will also we will be in open session on Thursday as well. Thank you.
Chair, is the time now 3 minutes, or are we still at 2 minutes?
The floor. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Kate.
We do have a caller whose line open.
The question was asked was the time now 3 minutes? And I thought we were still at 2 minutes and have not yet made the decision to move to 3 minutes. So I wanted you to just respond to Christian.
Yes, you're correct. It is 2 minutes, Christian.
Thank you, Chair. We will do 2 minutes with a warning at 15 seconds from 2 minutes, callers. Thank you.
Thank you.
And caller 6129, your line is open and the floor is now yours. Hello?
Yes.
The floor is yours. Oh, hold on. We'll do it again. Okay. All right. The floor is yours. Caller 6129, your line is open. Your line. Oh, well, now it's not. Okay. The floor is yours. Your line is open. Please talk 6129. If you will just talk, the floor is yours.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
There we are. Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Michael Deegan McCree. That's spelled MICHAELDEEGAN-MCCREE. I'm calling in on behalf of the California Black Census and Redistricting Hub, a coalition of 30 Black-led and Black-serving community-based organizations across this great state of California dedicated to maximizing Black community participation in the census and redistricting process. We are also members of another coalition, the IVE Redistricting Alliance. Today, we're calling in specifically to uplift the IVE Alliance's recommendation to urge the Commission to exhaust any and all avenues to uphold the values and spirits specifically of the Voters First Act, and to fight to maximize time for public participation in the redistricting process by setting a January 28th final map deadline. We support moving the primary election to no later than June 21st, 2022, reason to accommodate any necessary shifts to the 2022 election calendar as a result. A December 31st deadline will severely jeopardize the Commission meeting and constitutional requirements of the Voters First Act. In addition, a December 31st deadline would have significant ramifications on the ability of the public to engage meaningfully in the redistricting process, and would threaten and to disenfranchise California residents by forcing this commission to make important decisions that will have an impact for 10 years. The Voters First Act was built on the principles of transparency, which is what we are all trying to achieve.
15
this
seconds.
Commission is meant to uplift and center the voices of residents of California, therefore, to account for the 3 to 4 weeks that will be lost due to the various religious, social, and cultural holidays in November and December, and the potential recall that will certainly divert the public's attention away from the redistricting process during these same months. So we urge you to use the tools at your disposal and the community organizations at your disposal to pursue a January 28th deadline.
15
As always,
seconds
thank you
over
so much
time.
for your service, and we hope that you will consider our comments today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Deegan McCree. Next caller, please.
The floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, the
Yes.
floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. My name is Karen Diaz, and I'm calling with the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights. CHIRLA is an immigrant rights organization in California with national impact. Our mission is to achieve a just society, fully inclusive of immigrants. CHIRLA is one of the largest and most effective advocates for immigrant rights through our organizing, community education, and civic engagement. And we are a member of the IBE Redistricting Alliance. Today, I'm calling to uplift our recommendation to set January 28th deadline for the finalized maps, and express our support to move the primary election to no later than June 21st, 2022 to accommodate any necessary shift to the 2022 election calendar as a result. We believe communities are at the heart of why we have an independent redistricting commission process, and it will be those communities that ultimately bear the impact of the final maps for the next 10 years. So it matters profoundly what deadline is set. With additional time after the holidays, CBOs will be able to better support communities in analyzing and providing feedback on the draft map on the draft of the final map. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Ms. Diaz. The next caller, Katie?
Yes. The floor is yours.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Daniel Ichinose, last name spelled Ichinose. I'm Research Director of the Orange County Civic Engagement Table, or OCET, and that's spelled OCCET. OCET's a multiracial civic engagement table that was that has partnered with other key stakeholders in Orange County to form the People's Redistricting Alliance. It's a coalition centering the needs of low-income communities of color and working families in both statewide and local redistricting processes. So, as a member of the IDE Redistricting Alliance, OCET unequivocally supports its recommendation to both establish January 28th, 2022 as the Commission's deadline to finalize maps and shift the 2022 primary election date to no later than June 21st as a corresponding step to accommodate any necessary changes in the elections calendar. And as you know, Prop 11 was passed in 2009 to put redistricting into the hands of Californians like you and me, right? The Commission, we know, has an enormous responsibility, and there's no do-over, right? To do right by our state and the communities we serve, it's critical that the Commission is given ample time to hear from the public at every stage. Scheduling the deadline for the delivery of final maps over the holidays is we see as counterproductive to the inclusion of community voices that should really be at the center of this process. Given the importance of the lines you will draw, we strongly believe that the changes proposed by the IDE Redistricting Alliance strike the right balance between achieving the level of community participation that this redistricting process demands and robust engagement in the 2022 primary election. Thanks so much for the opportunity to comment. We look forward to working with you.
15 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Ichinose. Next caller.
The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Cha Vang, spelled CHAVANG. I'm with AAPI Civic Empowerment Education Fund, and we are also a member of the IBE Redistricting Alliance. API Force Education Fund is the alliance of community organizations serving Asian American and Pacific Islanders across the state of California. We advance policies, campaigns, and issues that support working class APIs. Our 5 steering committee organizations are Chinese Progressive Association, Asian Pacific Environmental Network, Filipino Advocates for Justice, Hmong Innovating Politics, and Khmer Girls in Action. In addition, we have member organizations such as Empowering Pacific Islander Communities, Filipino Worker Center, Chakata Movement, Asian Youth Center, and more across the state. Each of our organizations serve and live in different API communities, such as the Hmong community in the Central Valley, Chinese communities in SF, Filipino communities in the Bay and in LA, and the Cambodian community in Long Beach, in addition to Punjabi communities across the Central Valley. I'm calling today to uplift our recommendation to set the January 28, 2022 as the deadline for finalizing maps, and to express our support to move the primary election to no later than June 21st, 2022, to accommodate any necessary shift in the 2022 election calendar. We believe that ensuring enough time for community input in the redistricting process is essential so that no communities are left disempowered. No community is disempowered for the next 10 years. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Vang. Next caller, Katie?
Yes, Chair. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, Commissioners. My name is Jody Silkins Weber. I'm a former redistricting commissioner. I've not had the opportunity to congratulate you on your service. So I have not been paying much in the way of detailed attention to your meetings, but there have been quite a number of issues that have come to my attention. I understand that you are facing quite a number of challenges, different than what we did in particular. But I do want to bring several issues to your attention. First and foremost is that it's come to my attention that a subcommittee held a meeting April 21st, 2021, and pursuant to the memo from the Subcommittee on Governmental Affairs dated April 24, 2021, it appears as if there were individuals or community-based organizations who were identified as quote-unquote stakeholders that were invited to this meeting. But I would like to bring to this commission's attention, and I will remind you of this often, I'm sure, but pursuant to Government Code Section 8253A3, commission members and staff may not communicate with or receive communications about redistricting matters from anyone outside of a public hearing. I searched diligently on your website of any notice of this subcommittee meeting. And while there is no prohibition under Bagley-King that two commissioners that make up the subcommittees that I understand that you have cannot communicate, they can communicate between themselves. But I caution you that to the extent in which you invite any third person, stakeholders or otherwise, you are then in violation of Bagley-King and the Ralph Brown Act if you did not have the meeting in an open public hearing. So I want to encourage you to make sure that that is being followed, because I, as a member of the public, am a stakeholder that did not have an opportunity to participate in that meeting. And just to keep in mind that any backdoor communications, backroom meetings is something that obviously the Voters First Act wished to avoid by pulling the redistricting power from the legislature. I also want to bring to your attention that I have the utmost confidence in your ability, obviously, to perform and render the decisions that you've made in this particular circumstance. But keep in mind that you should support your own independence. And while it is encouraging for you to obtain information from stakeholders, community-based organizations, and those with interest, I certainly encourage you to make the best decisions that you are fully capable of doing. It is not a necessity for you to reach a compromise with community-based organizations or anybody for that matter. It's best that you reach a compromise among yourselves. In regard to the issue of Padilla, let me just bring to your attention as my time is waning.
Your time is actually up, so please.
1 minute overtime.
Will the chair indulge me momentarily and be brief?
Very brief.
Thank you very much. A strict interpretation of what Padilla would provide you an additional time frame that's necessary. The fact that you may have available raw data that the Padilla case did not necessarily envision should not force you to render a decision based on other individuals that may have an interest in this process. Your interest is representing the citizens of the state of California and obtaining the best opportunity for public participation. And I think if you apply a strict interpretation of Padilla, it will allow you an opportunity to put out draft maps, because this is the most important portion of your process, in my experience, is that you will receive a significant amount of public input after the draft maps are put out. So please do not limit your ability to do that. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Filkins-Weber. Katie?
Yes, Chair. Caller 7644. Again, caller 76. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. Eric Payne, Executive Director of the Central Valley Urban Institute. You may recall we sent a letter in October 19th, 2020. We're before you again today to express deep concerns about the administration's lack of thought to center this work around equity and be more inclusive towards Central Valley families in the COI process. We're happy to assist you with developing more COI forms in the Central Valley relative to the one you've already identified in agenda item 9E. We believe this work calls for more if we are truly to be a California for all, and I do mean all. Thank you for your time. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Payne.
And our next caller.
What do they need to do, Katie?
Huh?
What do they need to do to do that to do pound something?
Caller 9290. The floor is yours. 9290, go ahead.
So sorry about that. I had accidentally double muted myself.
That's okay.
Hi, my name is Adria Orr, spelled ADRIA-ORR, and I'm calling with Asian Americans Advancing Justice Asian Law Caucus. First, I want to say thank you so much to all of the commissioners for continuing to thoughtfully take on these complicated issues. I'm calling today to urge you to continue protecting this vital public process by committing to a late January deadline for map approval, such as the one uplifted by the IVE Alliance recommendation. It is critical to preserve the opportunity for community input to occur both in the initial and later stages of map drawing. While the Commission will take valuable community testimony during meetings in the summer and early fall, significant parts of the process can only happen after the updated data are available. And as we all know, the Commission can only conduct area analysis for your draft maps after receiving the updated data. Additionally, community-based groups need that data to make the map proposals they submit to the Commission as helpful as possible. But most importantly, once the Commission's draft maps are posted, community members and community-based organizations must have sufficient time to review and provide a response. These reactions are a distinct form of input that can only happen after the data release. The same is true for public input on any subsequent revised map. Additionally, we know it is unavoidable that key pieces of the timeline will overlap with the holidays, which is always a challenging time to engage people. We believe this will be even more true this year after so many folks skipped holiday gatherings in 2020. However, we should not resign ourselves to this overlap. There are still ways to make this overlap more or less damaging to the integrity of the public input process. These are difficult circumstances and all stakeholders are being asked to make adjustments. This is why we believe a late January deadline is an ideal compromise. It will allow for meaningful time post-holidays for the public to review and provide feedback on revisions to the draft map. Additionally, while election officials can provide more insight on the elections calendars in detail, it is our understanding that this scenario is feasible while keeping the primary election in June. Ultimately, given the circumstances, a late January deadline will most effectively allow the Commission to carry out the open public process that the California Constitution lays out and will allow time for the community engagement that is so essential to this process. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Orr.
We do have several more callers. I would like to remind people who've called in, if you would like to comment, to press *9 to raise your hand, and I will go ahead and open the next line or ask them to unmute. And caller 2829. And go ahead.
Hello, Commissioners. This is Renee Westerlusk, and calling for some clarification. I have comments to give on agenda items 9A and E, but I don't know when you're going to cover those. Will those be covered on Thursday?
Yes, I noted that earlier. Those will be covered on Thursday.
So I'll be able to give public comment then, correct?
Correct.
Okay. I'll let someone else talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Westalesk.
And moving down the line, again, *9 to raise your hand. It's not to say we don't have hands raised. I'm just saying. All right. Go ahead.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Sky Allen from Inland Empire United. My name is spelled SKYALLEN. We are a collective impact table serving Riverside and San Bernardino counties. We are facilitating the Inland Empire Redistricting Hub in our region, and we're also a member of the IVE Redistricting Alliance. I'm calling to urge you to consider a January 28th as your deadline to finalize district maps, and to urge you to express support for our primary date of June 21st. As a local organizer, primarily around issues of civic engagement like elections, census, and redistricting, I really want to stress how imperative it is that community members are given reasonable amounts of time to learn about and advocate in the redistricting process. Communities are at the heart of why we have independent redistricting commissions in the first place, but that doesn't mean redistricting itself is an approachable topic. We all need time, both this commission and groups on the ground like mine, to demystify the process and encourage public testimony. By design, we have less time this year to do that because of the delay in census data, now the confirmed recall election in the fall and the holiday season. Also by design, the primary has already been moved. It should be noted that our last statewide primary was in the month of March. So regardless of the specific calendar date, voters are already preparing to change their notions of when elections are going to be. Voters who know to plan for the first Tuesday of the month are paying enough attention to pivot. Everyone else, we're going to be targeting no matter what. So it's really important that this redistricting process is done right because we only have one chance to do it. Extending your deadline to January 28th and delaying the primary to June 21st would give us all the opportunity to engage community members around both elections and redistricting. Lastly, I want to quickly uplift a letter I submitted last night around item 9E, but I'll call back on Thursday to go over the recommendations we provided. Thank you all so much for your time and for all of the work that you do.
Thank you, Ms. Allen.
And moving down the line. Go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, Commissioners. This is Helen Hutchison. I'm calling on behalf of the League of Women Voters of California. My name is HELEN HUTCHISON. I wanted to first start by calling attention to the letter that is posted among many and your meeting handouts today, and thank the staff for posting it over the weekend. That was sent on behalf of the League of Women Voters and Common Cause California. We have been asked about the deadline for final map, and we, along with many others now, would support a January 28th deadline because it would allow for the public to fully engage with you as you finalize the maps. Any meeting you hold between December 20th and January 2nd, and arguably even longer than that, cannot honestly be considered a public meeting as intended by the Voters First Act. You, as commissioners, may be willing to give up family and holiday time, but you would not be joined in those meetings by members of the wider public. And the only public members that would join you would be those that are really true believers, radical special interests. We do recommend that you figure out the timeline that works best for you and that will give you that maximizes public input. Then you pivot and talk to elections officials, the Secretary of State and county registrars, to determine the best balance between your need to hold public meetings and get meaningful input to your work and their need to draw new precincts and hold elections with all the work that entails.
15 seconds.
And once you figured that out, then you can talk to others. But we do caution you that the legislature and some of the other interests have definite interests in both how the districts are drawn and when the elections are held. And so be aware of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson.
And to the next. Oh, no, that one was my fault. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I apologize.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I apologize.
Okay, great. No worries. I'm a little new to this. So I've been watching the town council meetings and some of these meetings just to kind of be more civically minded. And I'm an engineer. I really am into data and am just kind of a total nerd for a lot of this stuff. And it's kind of odd that y'all haven't hired a data manager. There's no vendor for data management. I think it would be a really good idea for there to be like a set understanding for how data is going to be coded, that there should be a contract with a data vendor or you have one on staff. I know in the town council meetings, staff has been way underfunded and just was so totally overloaded. And I think it would be a great idea to just have somebody on staff to be able to handle a lot of this data and sort of formalize that. So I just putting a public comment in here to say that I think that that would be a great idea just to make sure that all of this gets handled super well, that it's formalized, that it's really easy to understand, and that you can really pull out a lot of the trends that you need to from a lot of this data. So that's my 2 cents. Just wanted to say that, and thanks so much.
Thank you for your feedback. And just so you're aware, we do have a subcommittee that's working on data management. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And to the next caller. Go ahead.
Okay, hi, this is Stan Forbes, and I appreciate the opportunity to address the commission. Again, I'm Stan Forbes, and I was the chair of the previous commission from 2012 to 2017, and represented it in a successful competition with 500 other programs at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. We were awarded a $100,000 grant to visit other states to show the commission's success in drawing fair, nonpartisan districts. We spoke to legislatures and the public in 12 states, and I personally spoke to in 8. In each state, the commission was considered the gold standard due to its transparency and public participation. But independence from the legislature also was critical in establishing the commission's gold standard credibility as nonpartisan. The simple fact is the public doesn't trust the legislature. It believes the politicians will game the system, and it simply isn't possible to have an independent commission. They were astounded that we were truly and completely transparent, independent, nonpartisan, and successfully resisted political influence. The most important, and indeed the only currency the commission has with the public, is its integrity, including perceived integrity. Once the public believes the politicians are able to influence the process, whether true or not, the public's trust in the commission will be at risk. The loss of that trust, the map's integrity could become in question. Integrity, once lost, cannot be recovered. Therefore, I urge you to ignore the letter from the legislature asking you to accelerate the process and to ensure that all commission discussions comply with open meeting requirements. The commission needs to take the time necessary to let the public fully express their views, how the line should be drawn. The commission must avoid any appearance that politicians are driving or even influencing the process. I urge you to set a timeline that meets the commission's and the public's needs, not the legislature's. You represent the people of California who gave you independent power because they trust you, not the politicians, to draw fair districts.
15
I encourage you to avoid any appearance of betraying that trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Forbes.
And the next caller. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Julia Gomez, and I am a voting rights staff attorney at the ACLU of Southern California. I'm here calling on behalf of the ACLU of Southern California and the ACLU of Northern California. Together, our voting rights team works to protect and advance civil rights and liberties, including the right to vote and the right to fair representation. We seek to ensure that all communities, and in particular historically underrepresented communities, have a meaningful and fair access to engage in our democracy. Historically, the ACLU has worked on redistricting at the national, state, and local level including in the state of California. We haven't really been participating in statewide commission meetings because we've instead been focusing on local redistricting. However, we felt compelled to call in today because we are very alarmed and concerned by the redistricting timeline that's resulted from the census delay. And it's now overlapped with the holiday season that will surely prevent Californians from having a meaningful opportunity for public input on the maps you adopt. We're also concerned that the timeline does not provide the Commission with adequate time to ensure compliance with the Federal Voting Rights Act. We urge you to adopt a timeline that gives you sufficient time to assess and create, if necessary, majority-minority districts, and to ensure that those districts are in fact effective in providing minority communities the ability to elect candidates of choice. These analyses take time. They take rerunning election data, they take community input, and they cannot be done over the holidays. Similarly, Californians need time to review proposed maps and submit maps of their own. They too are going to be assessing Voting Rights Act compliance and whether it's possible to create majority-minority
15
districts.
seconds.
They require adequate time to prepare and engage in that public input process, and they've already stated that the current timeline poses real and significant difficulties in engaging the public. We therefore urge the Commission to adopt a timeline that truly provides opportunities for public input and engagement. Thank you for your service to this Commission and for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Gomez.
And to the next caller, we still do have a couple of raised hands, but I would like to remind those calling in to press *9 to raise your hand, indicating you wish to comment, and I will ask the next caller to unmute. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. This is Alejandra Ponce de Leon, ALEJANDRA, PEONCEDELEON with Advanced New Project California. Calling on behalf of the convener for the IVE Redistricting Alliance and weighing in and echoing a lot of the positions that our partners have raised already through public comment about carving enough time for community residents to engage in the redistricting process and supporting, the position to set the final map adoption for January 28th, and supporting to move the primary election to no later than June 21st. Something that I want to uplift is that our alliance brings a very valuable lens in this issue because our partners are both engaged in mobilizing underrepresented communities for redistricting and for elections. So our recommendation really reflects our understanding of what's needed on the ground to engage residents and voters on both fronts. We have been taking a lot of time of really thinking through and really thinking about, why this date. And for us, it really comes down to what do voters and residents need to fully engage in the redistricting process. For us, in redistricting, you need time for communities to understand and analyze the redistricting data, because this isn't something that is very simple and accessible to everybody. There's time is needed to draw the initial map, to communicate with each other and address potential conflicts, prepare testimony and advocacy, analyze, your draft maps and final maps and provide feedback. So all of this requires time. And we feel that in terms of the timeline that we are suggesting, we feel like it is an optimal timeline where it does require compromise from both ends. But at the end of the day, it's really about ensuring that communities are fully engaged and are enfranchised, not just for this election, but for the next 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ponce de Leon.
And the next caller, and I'd also like to remind those in the queue to press *9 to raise your hand, indicating you wish to comment.
Katie, I think some that are still online already gave comments.
Okay.
But I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah. Well, right now we have one hand left raised, so we will go with that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Caller 8514, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Stephen Blake, Blake, private citizen, and I'll try to keep this short. I am calling about the public input committee's meeting earlier this month. It was good to hear experts talk about how they put public maps together. However, I am very concerned about the repeated use of the term at that meeting of a unity map. It especially bothered me when it was picked up by the commissioners. There can be only one true, quote unquote, unity map, yours, in the final maps that the commission draws. That is what you're hired to do. That's the commission's job. It should not matter if a map is submitted by an individual, by a neighborhood, or as a consolidation of several groups. That map only represents their ideas and one perspective. Language like, this is a unity map, creates the image that size dictates importance, and that they should be moved to the top of the stack. If the public believes certain groups are getting special treatment, fewer people will participate in the process. No one, no matter how well intended, should ever be perceived as trying to displace the commission's role. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you, Mr. Blake.
And Chair, that was our last hand raised. So I
Okay. Thank you.
I'll go with that.
Yes, so we're going to move on, and I am extremely sorry for our LGBTQ panel. We're running a little behind, but that doesn't mean that you need to condense your presentation or your panels. So I am going to turn it over to Commissioner Sinai and Fornashari.
Great, thank you. Let's see, this is everybody's. Okay, I see Rebecca, Paul, Jeremy, and let's see, Rosa. Oh, there's Rosa. Okay, we're all here. Thank you for joining us. It's an exciting time for the Redistricting Commission, so we thank you for your patience, and we're also excited that you got to participate and hear all the different democracy in action. And today we are for the commissioners. There's a lot of different, we've brought in different panels at different times just to kind of raise our awareness and understanding of how to do outreach out in the communities in our zones as well as in the state in general. And today we have brought together an LGBTQ panel, both looking at the urban and the rural the community. It's a diverse community. It's not a monolithic community. Obviously, we have members from the community on the commission as well as allies. Today, we thought it would be very helpful to kind of get an overview and also understand some of the research that was done last time and that will be done this time around the community and as a community of interest. We are going to start with Jeremy from Equality California, and then we will move over to Rebecca Hook-Held from the LGBT Center in San Diego, and she will give a highlight San Diego as an example of how important redistricting and communities of interest are. And Rosa Diaz from the Imperial Valley LGBT Resource Center will give her perspective on outreach into the rural communities. And then Paul Mitchell from Redistricting Partners will share some research that they did in 2010 and some research that they're doing in 2020. Jeremy, it's all yours.
All right, thank you so much, and good afternoon, commissioners. Thank you so much for having myself, Jeremy Payne, Associate Program Director with Equality California. I was also happy to hear the amount of public participation and comments that preceded this presentation. So I'm very excited about the future of this commission. I'm going to share my screen and go through a presentation that I put together to kick us off. Give me just a second to get this ready. All right. Again, this is going to be a quick overview preceding the presentations of my colleagues here. This gives an overview of California's LGBTQ plus population and puts into some perspective of our role in the redistricting process throughout California, both locally and statewide. But before I begin, I just want to give some background on my organization that I'm representing. Again, that is Equality California, which is the largest statewide LGBTQ plus lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer civil rights organization. We have over 900,000 members as part of our organization. Our mission is to bring the voices of LGBTQ plus people and allies to institutions of power in California and across the United States, striving to create a world that is healthy, just, and fully equal for all LGBTQ plus people. As Commissioner Sine mentioned, it's not a monolithic community or identity. There is great and vast diversity that comprises the LGBTQ plus community. For my agenda, I will go through a quick overview of California's LGBTQ plus population, giving some data and statistics on Californians here. And then dive into understanding discrimination and marginalization that is experienced by the LGBTQ plus community to this day. There are still challenges and fights for equality, despite things like marriage equality that has passed. There are still other efforts that have been undermining the basic civil rights and protections of the community. And on a more positive note, I will want to spend some time talking about the LGBTQ plus contributions in California's redistricting process at the local and statewide level. And of course, there's time for Q&A if there's any questions, or I can just pass it along to my colleagues to kind of speed us along the way. So getting us started on California's LGBTQ plus population, as you can imagine, as you know, California is home to the nation's largest statewide LGBTQ plus population. And we have key LGBTQ plus population centers that are well known, like the city of West Hollywood and the Castro neighborhood in San Francisco and the Hillcrest neighborhood in San Diego, to name a few. Gallup estimates over 2 million Californians identify as LGBTQ plus, which is 5.3% of the adult population. And our internal polling shows that approximately 12% of registered California voters identify as LGBTQ plus, showing the strong voting patterns of the LGBTQ plus community as a unified voting base. When we consider the impact that stigma and discrimination and the influence that may have on acceptance and outright identification, we estimate the actual total of the LGBTQ plus population to be closer to 4 million or 10% of California's total population. Of course, this kind of goes into understanding that people may not be comfortable being out or expressing that in a poll or survey that when they're asked. As for the diversity of California's LGBTQ plus community and the community as a whole, the majority of the LGBTQ plus adults in California identify as Latinx, Asian, Black, American Indian, or Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, or multiracial, such as myself, and an estimated 1.3 million LGBTQ plus adult immigrants reside in the US today. So that's nationally, and approximately 22% of those are undocumented. For California specifically, we have an estimated or around 60,000 undocumented LGBTQ plus adults living here. So there is some great diversity of our LGBTQ plus community, and there's some considerations to take when looking at some of the discrimination and marginalization that's faced by the community. So that will jumpstart my next section here. So as you may already know, given the history of the LGBTQ plus community that's in the mainstream, historically, we have been underrepresented in the halls of power and frequently denied access to key social institutions and support networks. And despite the rising acceptance of LGBTQ plus people, the community continues to fight for basic civil rights while still experiencing hate and discrimination that perpetuates disparities in health and well-being, and that is to this day. There are disparities in healthcare access where many in the community can't find affirming healthcare that affirms and identifies and recognizes their gender identity. And of course, there are mental health disparities that are created or caused because of a history of discrimination and early attempts of bullying that kind of impacts youth in schools, where many LGBTQ plus students are unable to kind of achieve academic success because of a lot of the harassment they're facing. And there's stigma that's still prevalent within the community and throughout the nation. Those that are HIV positive face stigma throughout their entire lifetime. And that is a kind of a gray area that many have to navigate and continue to fight for basic rights and basic abilities to kind of do things in our community when it comes to healthcare access. So specifically for California, I wanted to highlight some basic civil rights and protection violations that have occurred in California's history, starting us off in 1978 with the BRICS initiative, which sought to ban LGBTQ plus people from working in California-based schools. More present day, in 2000, California voters passed Proposition 22, the Knight Initiative, which limited marriage between one man and one woman. And one of the most infamous cases, California voters passed Proposition 8 in 2008 and took away the freedom to marry for same-gender couples. But some of this is still happening, and only a few years ago, 2014, less than a decade ago, proponents of a veto referendum for AB 1266 sought to repeal non-discrimination protections for transgender students, gathering nearly 620,000 signatures. So that is a significant proportion of the population that was able to kind of still express discrimination, openly discriminate against the LGBTQ plus community, especially LGBTQ plus youth. And so I just wanted to provide some examples of official discrimination or kind of violations in California's history, but there's also things nationwide that impact the LGBTQ plus community as a whole. HIV is criminalized in more than half of our states, and gay and bisexual men are still restricted from donating blood, regardless of HIV status. And that kind of plays into the HIV stigma that I mentioned previously. Transgender and gender nonconforming people have extraordinary difficulty accessing affirmative healthcare and mental health services. And I will kind of show how that contributes to the LGBTQ plus homeless youth population. And across the country, there have been hundreds of legislative attempts and ballot measures, successful and unsuccessful, fortunately, to restrict or eliminate basic civil rights for LGBTQ plus people. And even this year, there have been attempts to eliminate basic civil rights for transgender people. So again, the most marginalized within the LGBTQ plus community are facing the brunt of these attacks. Those attacks come both physical, emotional, and more kind of conceptual. In terms of the physical, transgender, specifically transgender women of color, experience violence every day and are being murdered, but still fear turning to the police for help because of their gender identity. LGBTQ plus children make up an estimated 40% of all youth experiencing homelessness. And of course, that's largely because they so frequently do not find acceptance at home, which again contributes to a lack of academic success, dropouts, and then living on the streets and facing health disparities there. And even in terms of our political realm, LGBTQ plus elected officials and public figures face publicized homophobic, biphobic, and transphobic attacks. And there was a record number of those just in the last year during the 2020 election cycle. And so I just wanted to highlight that we're still a discriminated and marginalized community, despite some of the advances that we've had in terms of marriage equality. I don't want to underplay the importance of that, but I do want to score how important it is to understand what the LGBTQ plus community is facing in the modern day. And of course, moving on to a more positive note, I would like to talk about the LGBTQ plus contributions in California's redistricting history. And to start us off, there's probably nothing more important than knowing in 1976 what happened in San Francisco, when San Francisco voters narrowly passed Proposition T, which moved the election of supervisors from at-large to district elections, which allowed the LGBTQ plus community to elevate leadership from within their communities. This fair redistricting process was paramount to the election of Harvey Milk, the first openly gay man to serve as elected official in the state of California. But I don't want to highlight how redistricting has benefited one specific individual, but more to show how this empowered the local LGBTQ plus community of the Castro district, which was the district that was formed in Harvey Milk's representation, to keep allowing this key LGBTQ plus population center to uplift and identify leaders that were representative of their community. regardless of who it was, they have been able to have greater reflection and representation because of this process. And so this has allowed folks to elect choice candidates that are representative. And just in context of this map, that Castro area would be in around District 5, which still remains a board supervisor district in currently right now, which is now, I believe, number 8 in San Francisco. And that's where Harvey Milk served. Moving to the more modern day system of the California Citizens Redistricting Commission. In 2011, Quality California worked with redistricting partners who are here with us today and other LGBTQ+ organizations on the development of a plan, strategy, data set, and testimony before the CCRC and local redistricting commissions, which resulted in several districts that maximize the strength of the LGBTQ+ vote, which I mentioned is a strong voting base, and representation across the board. And this was really showing the work of LGBTQ+ community organizations under a joint cause, which was really grounded in supporting LGBTQ+ people power, civic activism, being able to create districts that are representative of the community so that people can elect a choice candidate that is representative of the actual neighborhood. And just across the board, bringing LGBTQ+ voices, priorities, and ideas into the mainstream now that the community is being recognized and included in these conversations, which is one of the kind of biggest factors. And for 2011, the redistricting process, this work began with our LGBTQ+ neighborhoods. These historic sites where our community has come together and resided together in the safety and proximity of each other. These geographic areas with high LGBTQ+ density allowed us to create heat maps, which kind of showed where LGBTQ+ neighborhoods were and allowed us to advocate for keeping them together to continue the strength and protections of this marginalized community. This equity-driven process was recognized throughout California, not just for the LGBTQ+ orgs out there, but for all marginalized populations that have historically been left out or kind of lacked a voice in the redistricting process. And just in terms of the future, we hope that this process and approach is carefully considered in the 2021 redistricting process so that the state of California can remain a beacon of hope for LGBTQ+ people across California, the nation, and the globe. And that kind of wraps up my presentation. I am more than happy to take questions now, but if it's a matter of time, I'd be more than happy to pass along to my colleagues to present on their presentations. And I'll stop sharing my screen.
We can take a few minutes. Are there questions right now, or do commissioners want to wait? Okay, we'll keep moving forward. Rebecca, you're on.
Excellent, thank you. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. My name is Rebecca Hookeld. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Chief Public Affairs and Civic Engagement Officer at the San Diego LGBT Community Center. Thanks so much, Jeremy, for setting the stage for the panel. I think it's really important to really talk about how this is not just a statewide effort, and I'm going to give a local example on some local redistricting efforts that, much like Harvey Milk, has really led to a legacy of an LGBTQ empowerment district in San Diego. And so in the city of San Diego, it's been long in the making, and I'm going to start our journey in the 1990s. This has been the work to create an LGBTQ empowerment district has been accomplished not in isolation, but in collaboration with other empowerment communities and lots of community engagement in the process. As Jeremy mentioned, the LGBT community is well represented and is a strong voting bloc. And so when called upon, when engaged to participate in civic engagement activities like redistricting, we have a history of showing up and really communicating our wishes for what that might look like. A few key things that led to San Diego's LGBTQ+ empowerment district was first, and Jeremy mentioned something similar in San Francisco, was creating district only elections. So really focusing on electing folks who are from community to represent us in government. And so rather going to a citywide, doing doing primaries that represented the community and then sending them out to citywide elections, this really allowed for local representation to be reinvested in the general election. So that was a really key turning point in 1990, and then what led to the 1993 election of Christine Kehoe, who was the first openly LGBT person in San Diego County to be elected. I talked to Christine in preparation for today's talk, and one thing she wanted to share with me was, well, there were two things. One is that what she heard from voters after being elected was that she was so excited, they were so excited that she doesn't just care about LGBT issues. She cared about their trash pickup and their potholes. And that's all to say is that LGBT elected leaders have a full breadth and diversity of experiences that they're going to bring to elected power. And we want to lean into that and communicate that to the voters, that we're not just there to talk about LGBTQ issues. And the other thing that she shared with is how important it was per election to really spread countywide, which led to the first DA in the country to be elected, who was an out lesbian, Bonnie Dumamis, and then has led to what is now 25 years of elected leadership from the LGBT community, and has created a true pipeline of LGBT elected leaders throughout not only the city, but the state, where we have, Senate President Pro Tem Tony Atkins being the leader of the state Senate, and so on. One thing that I want to underscore is through the Empowerment District, it not only created this one district, it's now created more opportunity for LGBT electeds throughout the city. And in 2018, there were 3 LGBT folks representing at the city council. I want to reflect, though, on some challenging times in terms of creating this empowerment district. In 2010, it was not very contentious in ensuring that the LGBT empowerment district stayed intact. But in 2010 was a real test. An additional district was being added to the City of San Diego City Council. And as part of that, the LGBT empowerment district was going to be carved out in order to create that new district. Organizers were prepared to defend the LGBT empowerment district while also uplifting the creating of these other racial empowerment districts that were really important to us. The final maps that were created created several empowerment districts, including 2 from the Latinx community, 1 for the Black community, and 1 for the LGBT community. But in this effort, we left a lot of work to do. The LGBTQ empowerment district in San Diego became less racially diverse, which, as Jeremy mentioned, is not representative of our LGBT community at large. So that was concerning to us. And there was a real failure to uplift the AAPI community and create their own empowerment district. So though I wasn't involved in any of those redistricting efforts, it's really led to some lessons that we plan on working on in this redistricting effort. 1, reinvesting and continuing that robust engagement for community. How can we show up? How can we lend our voices? How can we organize people to just share what they want to share, to keep communities intact and tell about the rich diversity within each of those communities? And so we're going to be leaning into those lessons learned to ensure that the LGBTQ empowerment district is also representative of our full diversity of our LGBT community, but also help advocate stronger for those other communities who may not have ensured their own empowerment district. And really, we think of each other as working in that coalition and collaboration as we have gone through, several of these cycles. And so that's really where the success of San Diego has created is a long pipeline of elected officials in leadership in government, but also in full and rich collaboration with our other, justice partners, our other community partners, to ensure that we all have a seat at the table. I'm happy to take questions, but I quickly just wanted to paint a picture that San Diego's elected more LGBT people than San Francisco, and that's a badge we wear with pride. This process is part of it, and I'm hoping this commission will do what it can to really listen to community and bring that forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Does anyone have any questions for Rebecca? All right. Rosa?
Hi, hello. I'm Rosa Diaz. I'm the founder and CEO of the First Imperial Valley LGBT Resource Center in Imperial County. And I just want to say that It wasn't easy for me to come out as a lesbian, more so because I did so after receiving a bachelor's in Christian education. I had a really important position in my local church. I was doing a little bit of everything. I was very well respected, got married, got divorced, had prior to getting divorced, had 2 daughters. And they were already in high school when I finally said, after years and years and years of battling with my orientation and my faith, I finally came out to the church. I told them, I love you all. I love what I do, but I'm a lesbian. I can't pray it away. I can't find therapy to help me. If that was an answer, I tried everything. I went through moments of depression, sadness, and fear, a lot of fear. What if people find out? There goes my position in church, there goes my reputation, there goes everything else. Finally, when I came out at the age of 50, I was trying to find a group, it's something, a support more than anything. And so I called the local college, which has an LGBTQ club. I called some friends who were part of the community, but I couldn't find what I was looking for. And it was people to communicate with, talk to about why it took me so long to come out. What do we do now? I know that there's a party scene. I don't want to be part of that. I want to be part of the educational support. And part of my life, most of my life, was serving. I wanted to serve. Where do I serve? Where do I go to give the support that I'm looking for right now? And there was unfortunately nothing. Here we are in Imperial County, I believe it's the 9th biggest county in California, but we're so divided because we're an agricultural area where to get to the next town, you go through miles and miles of cattle and field and carrots and lettuce and watermelon until you hit the next town. So where do I go? I'm from Brawley. So the biggest cities, Calexico, El Centro, where some stuff was happening. It wasn't easy to get there. I couldn't find that support. So what did I do? What I felt I was meant to do, and that was start my own support group. Not knowing if anybody was going to show up, I put it out in the local paper. First time I ever read anything about this population, LGBT, but I was still a coward. I used my middle name instead of my first name because people don't know my middle name. So if I put my middle name out there saying, hey, you're invited to an LGBT support group, they won't know that it's me. And that's how scary it was. So here we have our first meeting and didn't know if anybody would show up. There was no confirmation. It was on a Tuesday evening. The door opened at 6:30. The support group starts at 7. I sat there in an empty space with some chairs in a circle, not knowing if within the next half an hour, those chairs would be, I would see somebody sitting in those chairs. And to my surprise, people who are HIV positive, people who are married, people who are cohabitating, same-sex partners, they came to this support group and I was, wow, this is amazing. But all I knew was what I knew in my personal experience, and that was scripture and gospel music. And what do I tell them? So I told them my story. And 6 months later, after telling them my story, they said, this is what we need. We need HIV support groups. We need transgender services. We need lesbian groups. And I was like, ay. I wasn't ready for all these needs. I thought you guys would be pointing me to the places where I can get these supports. They didn't have it. So I called local agencies asking, what do you offer the LGBT population? Well, everything's on paper, but nothing was in action. Everything was still, we're still working on it. After 10 years, you're still working on it. It's a shame. I can't send people who are seeking transgender services to this place or that place or the other. So I make connections with San Diego. I make connections with Palm Springs. I go, what do you guys have? And how can we get that started here? Little by little, with the help of those who are coming to this support group, we started getting things done. And here we are 6 years later, the LGBT Resource Center, which still, and I'm so glad that Rebecca has shared how LGBTQ politicians and leaders have come forward to support. Imperial County still lacks those leaders. Just recently, we had our lavender graduation this past Saturday, and the new CEO of the El Centro Chamber of Commerce happens to be a married gay man, and he came and introduced himself to us, and he says, I'm here to help. Wow, that doesn't happen often. So what I'm saying is that this local, this rural community needs a lot of help. It has a high unemployment rate. We serve many people who are undocumented. We're actually helping immigrants who are being housed at different hotels because, and they're calling on us to assist with that. There's just so much work that needs to be done. But when it comes to the LGBTQ services, this place, the resource center, is where we can provide information, support groups that were non-existent in Imperial County are now happening here. A lot of one-on-one counseling, HIV testing, and then treatment after we get a positive test, and so forth. And we cannot do it without the support of local politicians and government. So this is why I think it's very important how we move forward. And still the stigma, still many politicians and leaders in the county don't want to be familiarized with our population, but we're getting there little by little. We're getting there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosa, for telling your story and also raising our awareness of how different it is to come out in a rural community versus urban centers.
Right.
We need to take a break at 2:30. Paul, how long is your presentation?
I can swing that.
You can swing that?
Yeah,
okay,
sure.
so I think what we'll do is we'll have Mr. Mitchell do his presentation, and then we'll take our break and come back so we can have a conversation. Sound good?
Great.
All right, see a lot of head nodding. All yours, Paul.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start up the PowerPoint and get you guys moved over here so I can look at you while I talk. Thanks for having me here today. Paul Mitchell with Redistricting Partners. We're working with Equality California and a number of LGBTQ groups around the country, actually, this year in redistricting efforts. The work that your commission sparked in 2011 has definitely expanded from its early days in San Diego up to the state commission, a lot of other local governments, and out now nationally. So I'm going to go through a few points, but first, while I was waiting and we had plenty of public comment, including from two former commissioners, I was reminded of the last commission. And I did a little math while I was waiting, and it looked like that the last commission, from the time they first met to the time they finished, was 243 days, and you have 244 days left, or that was 243 days from being formed to adopting final lines. You've been in place for 244 days, and you have 248 days left. So if it feels like you're halfway done, that might actually be the case. But to this topic, the work that we did in 2011, it really was developing a COI tool before there was a COI tool. We built data to provide the commission with information that could be put on the maps, with heat maps and data down to the census block level, to help them identify in the public hearings where that LGBTQ population was. And that mapping was then supplemented by the testimony from the public, which is so invaluable in terms of really putting a face to the issues and being able to hear the stories like the stories you've heard today from members of the LGBTQ community around the state. It's important that when you're listening to communities of interest, and there definitely is a lot of this within the LGBTQ community, that you look at where they're geographically identified, their cohesiveness, how tight knit the community is, how much they vote in tandem, how much their issues are related to one another, and then how those issues are impacted by federal and state elected officials and their policymaking. It's those three things that really make the testimony powerful and can supplement the data. The data set we built, and we'll be building a similar data set this cycle, included a number of different elements in order to create essentially a blended or synthetic metric to put into maps and allow the commission to identify the population. That included membership of LGBTQ organizations. It included the state's domestic partner database, which until recently, if you were under 65 and domestic partner, it was only for same-sex couples. It included political donations against Prop 8 and Prop 22. It included some data from the census, which we would love to work with the commission to try to improve around same-sex heads of household, and that data comes in from the census at the census tract level. It also included a thing called POS-LQ. And POS-LQ is an old algorithm that the census created in the 1970s when they were trying to identify opposite sex cohabitating households, unmarried couples. But that same metric can be used to identify same-sex cohabitating households and to use those algorithms on a voter file stripped of any partisanship or any other information, but simply looking at the composition of those households and then mapping that. And so in total, we were able to develop in 2011 something that was roughly 1 million different data points in order to create this blend, and then again, map it and show it and have community of interest testimony around it. So in 2021, we do have the opportunity for potentially some additional data points, but again, we might look to the commission and the weight that you have and pull you have potentially with the census to try to improve this. There is census tract information on same-sex couples, both married and unmarried, in the American Community Survey. It's at the census tract level, which, as you'll learn, as you go from the census tract to the block group to the block, it's harder to really manipulate that data and make it work in the districting context when it comes in those really big census tract level data. The data from the decennial census also has household characteristics that will identify same-sex households, but that is not going to come in the PL file or the legacy files. It's supposed to come in a supplemental file called the householder characteristics, which last we heard from the census might come a month or two after we receive the actual redistricting data set. So we might ask your help to try to push that up if possible. Like I said earlier, the original COI tool essentially was the LGBTQ data set, the first general statewide mapping of a community of interest outside of census data sets that are normally used in a statewide context for redistricting. And these allowed us to create essentially heat maps around the state to identify where this population is. And that data and that those numbers are critical in the process. But what's even more critical is really thinking about the LGBTQ community and its need to be really elevated as a community of interest. So the LGBTQ community is protected by the Civil Rights Act, and that Civil Rights Act protection was extended in a recent Supreme Court case. And the principles of the Voting Rights Act, which only applies to ethnic minorities, can extend, when you think about those principles, to some of the characteristics of the LGBTQ population. I want to kind of go through these a little bit first. So in 1982, a extension of the Federal Voting Rights Act, made these points really the rationale for why we have the Voting Rights Act, why we need, say, Section 2 protections or protections under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. So that includes history of official discrimination. And we heard Jeremy talking about the Briggs Act, the Prop 22, Prop 8, and that there's still national and statewide attempts to restrict LGBTQ rights. Voting being polarized. And as we know, issues like Prop 8, Prop 22, obviously there's been polarized voting. And then there have been other measures around the country that have had really severe polarized voting based on LGBTQ populations. The group is discriminated against in socioeconomic areas such as education, employment, and health. And again, as Jeremy pointed out, that these are still continuing and in specific areas of transgender healthcare and active bills in the legislature to address issues of that disparity. Overt or subtle appeals against discriminated groups in campaigns. We saw this as recently as the last election cycle, with a candidate for Congress being attacked by a sitting and still sitting member of Congress for being gay in California in 2020. So that still happens, and that's the overt discrimination and appeals to discriminated groups in campaigns. But there's tons of other subtle appeals. The extent to which communities have won elections. I'll tell you, hearing today from Harvey Milk forward, there have been a lot of examples of the community being able to elect a candidate of their choice when districts empower them and when they're drawn in a way to make sure that their voice is not silenced. And then finally, the degree to which elected officials have been unresponsive. And we see this in the continued criminalization of HIV, the transgender healthcare and violence concerns. And I'm going to just tell a personal story. I was a legislative staffer, and it wasn't that long ago that I was a legislative staffer in a meeting with Democrats, a leadership meeting, where one of the legislators, not currently still in office, but one of the legislators stood up and was talking about a bill that was coming up that day and said, I don't want to vote for one goddamn more Mark Leno gay marriage bill. And this was in California, and this was modern times. And the fact that we still have elected officials, statewide, federal, and local, that are unresponsive to the needs of this community is a further reason why this needs to be an elevated community of interest. And this commission broke ground. In 2011, when we came forward, your commissioners and your demographer, Karen McDonald, were extremely responsive to this need in this community and to the idea that they could work with us to make sure that this data around the community can be exposed and be made available in the districting process, and to invite testimony from this community. And that has continued to this day. This current commission should be praised. Several members already have been outspoken about this issue and have said in, not subtle words, that they're going to fight to make sure that that communities like the LGBTQ community are empowered through this districting process. So with that, I want to thank you for having us, and I know we need to have a break, and I left you 1 minute, Commissioner Sinai.
You practiced well. Thank you, Paul. Commissioner Fernandez, Chair Fernandez, I will give it back to you.
Okay, so we are gonna go ahead and go to break, and if everybody can be back at 2:45, then we can continue on with questions. Thank you. Great, thank you. Welcome back, everyone. We will continue on with the LGBTQ panel, and at this point, we are at, if any commissioners have questions. Commissioner Sinai, did you want to go ahead and facilitate that, or?
Sure, I can do that. Neil, unless you want to jump in. I do want to acknowledge that this panel was put together by Commissioner Fornishari and I. Sorry to call you Neil. And who has questions or comments or thoughts? Yes, Commissioner Toledo.
Yeah, I'm curious. This is for Mr. Mitchell. So you talked about an enhanced community of interest for the LGBT community and considering the community through the lens of, shall we say, a heightened community of interest. But you also talked about the VRA and how it might extend to, or at least some of the analysis extend to the LGBT community. I'm wondering if there's any, if you know of any precedent across the country where that's been done.
No. So I think that there are parallels in the concepts that underlie the undergirding of the VRA and why protected classes need that protection and what defines them and how they're different than other kinds of communities of interest. And obviously with the Voting Rights Act, there will be a time at which you'll look to your Voting Rights Act legal counsel and say, can we, or are we required to, regarding these districts, actually consider race in a way that you wouldn't normally be able to do because of the Voting Rights Act? This will be a different situation in that the LGBTQ community, you can draw districts while looking straight into the LGBTQ community and drawing districts to maximize their voting power without the same kind of complications that you have with the Voting Rights Act. But I think the simple point, and we've talked with legal counsel and some of the people who've come and testified before your commission testifying about the VRA, we've talked to them about the fact that some of the same arguments that bolstered, especially in those 1982 amendments, that bolstered the need for majority-minority districts, that those same kind of principles can apply to other kinds of communities of interest. And it just happens that the LGBTQ community almost checks all those boxes.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Commissioner Stefani?
Sure, thank you. And thank you to all of the panelists who are here today. This was super informative, and I actually teach a class in California politics, so I'm really already thinking about different ways, much of the information I can use in the classroom in the future. So thank you for that. I just want to kind of follow up on this thought process around the VRA and when we go about doing our work, thinking about LGBTQ communities as communities of interest. I think certainly there's many parallels as to protected communities under the VRA. And yet at the same time, while there are certain areas where we see compactness in the LGBTQ community, there's also LGBTQ folks living everywhere across the state. What advice do you have for us as we proceed over the next several months at thinking about, outside of those kind of key areas that you outlined, where there are concentrated communities or compactness, as we might think about from a VRA perspective, how should we go about approaching those communities as well if we want to consider them as communities of interest?
Well, if I'll dive in here first, that first off, you're right that the idea around these communities of interest is that if you can draw them into a district wherein you're maximizing their ability to elect a candidate of choice and you're putting a community of interest into an area, that geographic compactness is really valuable. And insofar as certain communities, it's not just the LGBTQ community, but other communities, even the African-American community in California, you see it's dispersed more through the state than it used to be. And it really is true. In fact, one of the books that I have on my shelf is called Mapping Gay LA. And this was an old book that you can borrow if you want to use it for one of your classes, but it looked at the creation of gayborhoods and the fact that they existed in part because the community felt as though they could be themselves. They felt as though they could be protected. And there was a necessity in certain areas for those gayborhoods to really come up. And And as this state in particular, has become more affirming of the LGBTQ community, it has caused more people either A, to disperse, or simply more people in more rural communities to be willing to be themselves. One of those two or both of those kinds of things have allowed for more dispersed population. So I think you're going to find this challenge in almost everything that you're doing. You're going to find communities that spread beyond their historic bases. And part of the job is going to be to identify where they're geographically dense, how you can protect them, and in areas where they're not geographically dense, how and where you balance the needs of protecting those communities with other communities of interest. So it really is kind of the art of this process, and it's why that COI tool that has been developed even before you guys got seated, that COI tool is going to be really critical. And testimony is going to be really critical, because it's real easy to just kind of not see some of these populations in rural communities, in the Inland Empire as an example, but they're there and they should be a part of the conversation.
Yes, Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you. That sort of leads directly into my question also. A lot of these, they're clearly communities of interest, so there's no question. But a lot of them, the smaller communities of interest, particularly in rural areas, in other areas, you say, well, that's something we have to identify. That's very, very hard. Can we use the leverages of your, groups to help bring all these people forward and use our, we're advertising the community of interest tool, because that way, if we can get the more people we can get, including the LGBTQ community, to use that tool, it has a spot to give testimony on it. And it's involved in the first draft of our maps. You don't have to wait for the second draft. You can put it in now. But if you can, I really appreciate where everyone's coming from and the hard road that has come down, and to come forth within the public with our group is just monumental. It's wonderful. And if we can continue to have your participation to help us identify all the different communities and have everyone come and use our COI tool, I'm hoping that, and is the data that you've already been using, is that also compatible with our community of interest tool? Or do we have to also process it to integrate it?
Yeah, I think Jeremy can talk a little bit about what they're going to be doing to try to work around the state to get people to participate with the COI tool. On the data side, it is absolutely something that can be drawn down to the census block level and then utilized kind of as a layer of the COI tool, or in the future, there could be some integration with that, and we're happy to provide that. We're also going to be working with other vendors. As you know, there are other mapping tools, and your commission has the technical capability to pull in information from other mapping tools as well, and we'll be working with them. So Jeremy might be able to speak to the engagement that they're expecting from members of.
Yeah, I do want to say, I'd love to hear from Jeremy. One quick thing. There is one issue between, there are many, many other mapping tools, but the community of interest tool, it doesn't have to be reprocessed. The information goes directly into our line drawers, can then grab that. So I'm sort of trying to promote a little bit more, make sure everyone is aware of that additional step of data management, which is required by us. But now, please, Jeremy, or Mr. Payne, go ahead and please, we'd love to hear your ideas.
Absolutely. Yes, Equality California has a long history of nonpartisan civic engagement among the LGBTQ plus community. It's really grounded in our mission of developing the people power, of making sure that the grassroots is leading the charge. And so Equality California serves as essentially a state convener of LGBTQ plus organizations around the state, not so much in kind of the authoritative role, but just in kind of, we have relationships with LGBTQ plus organizations, large and small, in the rural pockets of our our state. And we will be working with them so they understand the value and importance of engaging the local communities. We are a trusted messenger at Quality California to the LGBTQ plus community, but these local LGBTQ plus resource centers are the true trusted messengers, and they can speak and vouch for the importance of getting involved in this local redistricting commission, or in the locally involved in the California Citizen Redistricting Commission. So when it comes to community input and organizing and being a part and participating in the COI tool, this is something that we will be advocating for and making sure that all partners are educated and involved so our communities can be as dialed in and participate as much as possible, giving public comments, participating in the COI tool. Anything they can do to be part of the process is what we are aiming for.
Thank you, Jeremy. Rebecca or Rosa, would you like to add anything from kind of the local perspective on how you're thinking about redistricting and engaging your local communities in the efforts?
When it comes to reaching out to those towns that are still far from the cities, the main cities being Raleigh, El Centro, and Calexico, we help with the census. We're now helping with COVID vaccinations. And one of the things that we're able to do is go out into those rural communities, set up some type of kiosk or resource table, put up our flags and provide information in both English and Spanish to the community. I think that communication is extremely important when it comes to change in our communities. Many people go about their day to day and they're not informed. And this is where we step in and provide that information, even in how we've impacted our community with the services and the identities and orientation, which was for many in our community, it just wasn't a topic of conversation. Here we are now in local parades, marching with our rainbow flag, our trans flag, our queer flag, and you should see people in the community. They don't know whether to applaud or question, and there's so many different reactions. Some people really give us a lot of hurrah when we go by on these parades that were so very conservative. So what I'm saying is that it takes a group of people who know the community to go out there and communicate and disperse the information. And I think that is one thing that we've been pretty powerful in. So definitely communication, information, and getting trusted messengers to help with that.
Thanks, Rosa. And I know that you've invited the commission to do a presentation to your volunteers next week or later this week. So thank you. Rebecca?
Yeah, the only other thing I would add, and it's also, so a slight echo, is it's about breaking down what you all are doing. I think part of it is, Rosa said, we go about our daily lives. We're not quite sure, unless you're really into this work or you work in this work, it's not really on your radar, especially as we come out of the pandemic. And so the center really sees our role as a conduit of really digestible information and connecting people to know how to engage. So, as you all are talking about the tool, I'm thinking about, well, how do we even tell people what the tool is, how to open it, how to walk through it? I know these are all things you're thinking about too, because we're not the only community of interest, but we ran into similar things with the census. We ran into similar things when it came to, the election primary date changing to March, right? So these are things that as a community trusted messenger, we're used to leaning into and saying, new update, here's the next civic time for civic engagement for you to participate, and here's how. And the other is that, Paul, you're speaking my language. We really love data. And so, the center has a robust data file and a voter file that we plan on utilizing to really turn out people and connect with them about what's at stake, where their neighborhood is at, and connecting them to access and information and how to utilize the tool. And so I think that's part of it, is taking from broad strokes of general communication to then also dialing down to our communities of interest, to saying, you know, not sounding the alarms, but saying like the time is now to speak up and have your voice heard when it comes to, you know, redistricting and being represented at all levels of government. The other thing I'll slightly just add is that, you know, we're not just talking about the state and maybe the county and local city levels. You know, we're really thinking about how school districts represent us and what does that really look like. We're thinking about the community college school district and what does that really look like in terms of representation. And so I talked about how the LGBT community in San Diego has been doing this for a while. And in that, we're able to grow into where we're really able to focus and try to flex our muscles a little bit.
Thank you, Rebecca. Anyone else have any questions? Yes, Commissioner Kennedy. You're on mute, Commissioner Kennedy.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Going to Commissioner Sadwani's point earlier, you know, Palm Springs is probably the example in California of a compact LGBTQ community, to the point that the entire city council was LGBTQ at one point for a short time, until the city went to district elections. You know, so I guess that begs the question: if you've got, you know, a compact but small-ish community, not big enough to constitute even an assembly district at 400,000 and some, you know, then what are we looking at doing? And you know, I just also wanted to take the opportunity to thank Jeremy, Rebecca, Rosa, and Paul for your presentations and your work. I only wish our friend George Zander could have lived to see you addressing the commission today. And to Rebecca and Rosa in particular, you know, you always have, and this is not to disrespect any of my colleagues, but if you want to request a particular commissioner to address a group at the center, that's part of our speaker request form. So feel free to request someone, even if they're not your assigned outreach zone commissioner. Thanks.
Great. Yes, Commissioner Toledo.
I'm just curious, in thinking about Commissioner Kennedy and Commissioner Sadwani's point about you know, communities of interest and just the size of the LGBT community, I'm wondering, has there been work done to potentially do community type or unity type mapping with the LGBT community and other groups? I don't know what those groups might be or who they might be, but other historically excluded groups.
I think Jeremy might be able to speak to that. Equality California is part of the IVA Alliance, correct, Jeremy?
Yes, we are a member of the IVE Redistricting Alliance, working alongside a number of community-based organizations that are not LGBTQ plus themselves, but work within other marginalized communities to make sure we uplift and elevate all voices. That's important to Equality California. As was mentioned a couple of times, that the LGBTQ plus community is not a monolithic identity. When we uplift our Black community, we uplift the LGBTQ plus community and vice versa. And so we understand the value of lifting up all marginalized communities that have not had as much representation in the redistricting process. And so, yeah, we are honored to be a part of the IVE Redistricting Alliance and help form maps and ideas that benefit, hopefully LGBTQ plus community, but all communities that are actually representative of the communities that we're working in. So yeah, we are actively working alongside others to kind of best strategize on how we develop our COIs and go from there.
Yes, Commissioner Turner.
Thank you. I wanted to start out again by thanking all of you. Thank you, Jeremy, Rebecca, Rosa, Paul, for your presentation on today. I wanted to go back, Rebecca, when you were talking earlier, it's kind of where I've been hanging out too. Yes, we want to teach the folk how to use the COI tool and access it and all those other things. And I think going a step beyond, to the degree, we're certainly looking at it as a commission, but as I'm in conversation with other community groups, to the degree that you can take the importance and the lived experience of individuals who are represented and encourage or come up with, be it TikToks, be it an infographic, something that would be specific to your constituent folk that's following you. And I'm saying it in that manner for everyone that's watching the hearing. It would be so important for people to say, not just submit, or in addition to submitting COI in your neighborhood and what's important, play it out a little bit further and talk about what happens if you participate and if you do not participate. What are some scenarios that, how you may have your voice muted as opposed to how you'll be able to garner more power, et cetera. And I think as that's done in fun ways, everything's on social media right now. And I think it would be something that's engaging and people will actually pay attention to a little bit more if it's being shared in that manner. And people go, oh yes, I do want to take the time to do a COI, but now I understand why and the difference it can make for me and the folk that's near and dear to my heart.
I really appreciate that, Commissioner Turner. And, to really underscore, I think we all live intersectional lives in some aspects, right? And so one of the things, we're really hoping to do is to peel that back a little bit, to say that, yes, the LGBT representation is important, but we also know there's lots of other things that are important, lots of other pieces of your identity that are important to be represented through this process as well. And so it's that collaboration. And to make it fun, I think we're a bunch of geeks right now nerding out about redistricting, but to bring that to their level about why it matters and how to engage it in a fun way. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sidwani, did you just have your hand up? No. Okay. Anyone else? Well, thank you so much, Rebecca and Rosa and Jeremy and Paul. It's been great having you. You've given us some good food for thought, and I'm sure you will all continue to be engaged in our process and bring many behind you. This is the time to start having the conversations about communities of interest and having people think about how they want to identify their communities and let us know. Thank you again, and have a great day.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you. Take care and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you. Okay, so now I did see Eric was logged in somewhere, and Karen is too. Okay, so next we'll be moving on. Yeah, there's Eric. I saw you come and go, and Karen's here as well. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to agenda item 14, which is the demographic shift panel. I will pass it on to Commissioners Sadwani and, was it Yi? Yes. Okay, good. Thank you. And thank you both for being here today.
Commissioner, you want to introduce our panel?
I'll defer to you, Commissioner.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, we are very excited to welcome Eric McGee from the Public Policy Institute of California and our line drawer, or the head of our line drawing team, Karen McDonald, as well, to join us this afternoon. As we have reported for some time, actually, for quite some time, we had the chance to connect with the Public Policy Institute of California, and they graciously offered to provide an update on some of the trends that we've been seeing in terms of California's demographic change over the last 10 years. We had started, I think, having this conversation back in December, and we now actually, of course, know and have the reapportionment data that was released yesterday. So certainly, I think this is a timely conversation as we await the actual redistricting data. So I'm going to pass it over to Eric to begin, and he's going to provide the analysis from PPIC. And then Karin is here also to help kind of frame this information. So as we learn more about the data trends that we're seeing in California, Karin, from the perspective of our line drawer, will kind of help frame this in terms of what kinds of things we might be thinking about in terms of our outreach, and provide some potential recommendations for us as well. So Eric, can I pass it over to you?
For sure. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for having me today. I'm going to try to share my screen and see that this works. All right. Can everyone see that?
Perfect.
Is that good? Okay. So this is work that I put together with my colleague Jennifer Pollack at the Public Policy Institute of California, and we're going to be presenting some maps of population change in California from 2010 through 2019. And this was this was originally the commission came to us to ask for some sense of where outreach might be most effective to sort of to plan outreach. I think these maps also may be helpful just as kind of background information about how the sort of the geography of the state's population has changed over the last almost 10 years. So hopefully it'll have those dual purposes. So the first question is, what are we mapping? So what we mapped out was total population, which means we're including children and non-citizens here. So because we wanted to get a total sense of what a community was like and how large it was. And then we're going to break down that total population for 3 separate groups. We're going to have the Latino share of that total population, the Asian share of that total population, and the Black or African American share of that total population in each case. Where are we getting this information from? Well, for the starting point, in 2010, we're using the decennial census, so the actual enumeration. In 2019, we're using the American Community Survey. Now, I think you guys maybe at this point are a little familiar with what the American Community Survey is, but I just wanted to emphasize that it is a survey. So the smaller the unit of geography that you're working with, the smaller the sample size and the wider the larger the margin of error is around your estimate. So you can only kind of drill down so far with the ACS before you start having to make some trade-offs. And so we chose these particular data sets to try and offer the best balance of having both the latest data, the most recent information, and the smallest level of geography. So we could show you block groups, a very small level of geography with the ACS, but then we'd have to use 5-year averages. So we wouldn't be showing you 2019, we'd be showing you 2015 through 2019. And we'd be blurring some change that's been happening over the last few years in California. Certainly the population of California has slowed down just in the last few years. We could also show you just a single year of the ACS. But then we got to go up to a slightly higher level of aggregation to the PUMA level, and so we decided to choose that as a kind of an optimal trade-off to provide the most information and the most recent data. So, but wait a minute, what's a PUMA? Well, yes, it's a large cat, but in this case, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a public use microdata area. This is a census unit. Statistical unit the census has created that consists of at least 100,000 people. In California, we have 265 PUMAs with a median population of around 140,000 people. Now, PUMAs are bad for drawing lines because they're too high a level of aggregation. They can't give you the level of geographic detail that you need for the line drawing process. However, they can be useful for mapping out some of the broader demographic patterns, which is what we want to do here today. The final little nuance before I go into the maps is how do we define race and ethnicity? Because the census allows people to identify more than one race and ethnicity. So for our purposes here, we wanted to be, when we're describing any given group, we wanted to be as inclusive as possible. So anyone, when we talk about Latino, we're talking about anyone who identifies as Hispanic, no matter what their race or ethnicity is. Otherwise. when we're talking about Asian or Black or African American, it's anyone identifying with these groups alone or in combination with some other group. So there may be overlap between these groups, and if you sum them all up, they would sum to more than 100%. But we wanted to provide, there's not a huge amount of overlap like Asian, Black, African American, but there's enough, and we wanted to show sort of have the best sense of how many people in that community, at least in part, identify with that particular group. So there'll be some overlap. So the first map here is just the total population change. So this is just the percent change in the 2010 raw population number. The main places in the state. So and anything that's blue here is an area that has grown. Anything that's yellow or red, orange, red, has lost population. So the biggest areas of growth that we see are around the Inland Empire, like Western, San Bernardino, and Riverside counties. The Bay Area, especially sort of the East Bay and the far South Bay, and Sacramento. Those are the big things. San Diego also has seen some growth as well. You also note this kind of amazing little point here in the north. That's where the campfire happened. That really deeply red area is where the campfire was. And what this is suggesting is, since we have an area of very high growth just to the west, it suggests that a lot of the victims of the fire relocated just to the west of where Paradise was. This is showing the same information from the previous map, but showing it from a kind of a little bit more of a redistricting perspective. So this is showing each Puma's deviation from the statewide total increase in population. And why this is useful is because areas that have grown slower than the rest of the state, even if they've grown, will still need to lose districts to areas of the state that have grown faster than the state as a whole. And the big difference between this map and the previous one is Los Angeles, because Los Angeles is a very highly populated area, but it has in fact grown. So if you look at this map, a lot of LA is blue, and overall LA has increased a little bit in population, but it hasn't increased as fast as the rest of the state. And so it's going to need to lose some districts to other parts of the state. In particular, as I mentioned, this Inland Empire growth area where things have increased quite a bit. Now, before I get into the change, some of the other change for the racial ethnic groups, I wanted to show sort of where these racial and ethnic groups are found around the state in 2019. So this is not a change graph here. This is just showing in 2019 the Latino share of the population in each Puma. The Latino population in California is kind of everywhere in the state. So there's at least a modest Latino population in many parts of the state. But the places with the highest concentrations are in sort of central Los Angeles, and in the Central Valley, and Imperial County, and in the Inland Empire. That's where you see the sort of highest concentrations. Also kind of the mid-coast as well. This is the same kind of map for the Asian population in California. And the Asian population is much more concentrated than the Latino population. In particular, you see Asian communities in San Francisco Bay Area, in the Sacramento region, a little bit in Fresno and Bakersfield, and then, of course, Los Angeles County, Orange County, and San Diego. But in other more rural parts of the state, you don't see quite as much. And then finally, the Black or African American population. Here, it's even more concentrated. It's largely a story of central LA County, the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area, and Sacramento, with some also in San Diego. I think this area out here in the desert may be due to some military bases that are out there, but I think it's kind of interesting that there is a slightly higher concentration out in that region too. Now, how have these populations changed? So this is now showing, again, the change in the share of the population. So the blue areas are parts of the state where, in this case, the Latino population, the share of the population has grown, and the yellow or orange, red type areas are where it has shrunk. Keep in mind when you're looking at this that a population can grow overall and still decline as a share of the total population if the population is growing very fast, and if other groups are growing still faster. So the again, when we come down to this growth area in the Inland Empire, we see that the Latino population has been growing a lot there as a share of the total. It's kind of a mixed in LA. And then the thing that stands out here, I think, is the Bay Area actually has seen the Latino share decline. And as I'll mention in just a minute, that's not because the Latino population hasn't grown in the Bay Area, but it just hasn't grown as fast as other groups. But it's a lot of the state is blue here. Here's the same for the Asian share of the population. Here, the thing that really stands out is the Bay Area, where it has grown quite a bit, but also some parts of LA and Orange County, we've seen some increase. And then this is the Black African-American population. It's a little bit more of a mixed bag. Some areas have declined, some areas have increased, not a lot of areas of significant increase. And actually overall, the Black population has been pretty status quo. So they're growing at about the same rate as the rest of the state. So I'm just going to then show you in a little more detail some of the larger population centers in the state. So this is all kind of the same information that I've already presented, but just zoomed in. So this is total population change for LA County. So a lot of the county has seen some modest declines, but there's been some pockets of kind of larger increases just south of the central city. And overall, the county has grown a little bit since 2010. Here's the change in the Latino share of the population in LA. Again, there are some losses in kind of the central city and East LA, but they've been offset by some growth in the far north and in the Compton area. And overall, Latino population share in LA has been pretty stable. And here's the same thing for Asians. It's been increasing in most parts of LA County. Overall, increased a little over 1%. And then finally, the Black African-American population share has been kind of like it is in the rest of the state, sort of a mixed bag, a little bit of decline here, a little bit of increase there, but mostly kind of status quo. There's some, like the area around LAX has been a area of significant decline, and then Santa Monica increase. Then moving on to these are zones I, J, and K. If you want those labels, this is kind of the Inland Empire, Orange County, San Diego. There's been this is total population change, and this is one of the growth areas of the state, as I've said now, about between 5 and 10% growth, so especially in Western and Bernardino and Riverside counties. So in comparison with LA, a lot less population decline than we saw in the LA map. Here's the Latino share of the population for the same region. Again, big increases in the Inland Empire area. The Asian share of the population, the biggest increases have been in Orange County for the Asian population, where the share has increased by more than 5% in many Pumas and by about 4% overall. And then the Black African American population, again, some places that have seen bigger increases or larger declines, but overall kind of a status quo. And then finally, the Bay Area. So this is the total population change. You can see that most of the growth in the Bay Area, there's a lot of kind of higher growth areas, but the areas of the most intense growth have been kind of out in the Dublin Pleasanton area out here. The like Mission District of San Francisco, Santa Clara, and then some other parts of San Francisco, Oakland, and then the exurbs of San Jose. And then you can see up here in the corner where Sacramento is also a growth area. And this is what I had mentioned earlier. The Latino share of the population of the Bay Area has actually been declining. But while that share has declined, hasn't declined very much, but it has declined just a little bit. But while the share has declined, the actual number of Latino residents has grown about 8% between 2010 and 2019. But other groups have grown more over the same period of time, and they haven't kept the pace with the overall growth in the Bay Area. And one of those groups that has seen a large increase is Asians in the Bay Area. So you see a lot of growth, again, around Santa Clara and in that Dublin Pleasanton area. There's some big boom areas for the Asian share of the population. And then finally, Black or African American share in the Bay Area it's kind of the same story as we've seen elsewhere. Although you will know Sacramento has been an area of relatively large growth, but overall, kind of some growth here, some decline there, but status quo overall. And that is the maps that I have to present today. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric, for presenting all of this information. And I think just as a reminder, I think Commissioner Yee and I reported this previously, that the purpose of this is not necessarily to have us go draw maps now that we've seen some data. We specifically used had this overlaid with the zone outreach maps so that as folks are doing their outreach to different regions of California, you can have a kind of a sense of what it is that's going on in those regions, and make sure that you're hitting on some of those groups that may be growing that you weren't necessarily aware of, that had that kind of demographic shift. I wanted to turn now and to Karin and let her just provide a little bit of feedback or thoughts on how we might be able to use this data as we're moving forward in our process, some things that we might want to think about, and then of course we'll open it up to question and discussion.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Sadwani, and hello, commissioners. It's nice to be here with you. And also thank you to Eric for making these really beautiful maps. I think we all love maps, and it's really great to see a different set of data mapped, because usually in redistricting, we don't deal with pumas. We deal with tigers, actually. The tiger file is the geography of the Census Department, and they must really like their animals over there. So pumas today, and thank you again, Eric. There are some reasons, of course, for why we don't use pumas. They are not just too large for redistricting, they also really vary in population. As Eric pointed out, pumas have a minimum of 100,000 people in them. They're delineated by the states in collaboration with the Census Bureau. They basically just serve a different purpose. And they also have estimate data. So these are data, again, that are collected by the American Community Survey, 300,000 respondents roughly every month throughout the year. And sometimes on the local level, I tell people, just because you're getting data from the ACS for your particular jurisdiction doesn't mean that anybody in your jurisdiction was actually asked. any of these questions, but that, of course, it's the law of statistics and all of that. But anyway, it's something to keep in mind that these are estimate data, and also to keep in mind that very soon you will have data from, the census. The legacy data set, of course, is coming our way, luckily, even a little bit sooner than we had anticipated. And then we can look at, race and ethnicity and so forth on a smaller unit of analysis. It's also good to keep in mind that the population data totals that we're looking at, actually, Eric didn't map, of course, population totals. He mapped percentages, which is also a little different from what we usually do in redistricting. But the population data are going to change once we get the PL94 in the legacy format. And so we will have updated data. But having said that, one thing that is going to stay the same that we already have access to is the citizen voting age population, which is also collected by the American Community Survey. But we're not going to get a different data set for our redistricting purposes. So that's something to be kept in mind. What you're seeing here, of course, is these are wonderfully educational maps. They show you the way that the populations are shifting. They show you shares of the population. They show you where something may be happening with districts. We don't really yet know. I mean, I wouldn't want anybody in LA to start hyperventilating about potentially losing districts. We don't have that information really yet. We just, have this like very aggregated information available, but, very soon we will know which way the districts are shifting. But in any event, we do know something about how some of the racial and ethnic populations have moved throughout the state, and that will, of course, potentially help inform your outreach strategies. I think on some level this will probably support what you already knew, and that is also a good thing, because it's always good to have a different data, an additional data set that helps you confirm that you're thinking about things the same way. And and one thing that you've known, of course, all along is that in Los Angeles you're going to have to do a lot of outreach, because you have lots of different population groups living in very close quarters, and figuring out where to draw lines there is not going to be an easy feat. So, collection of communities of interest in those areas is very important. And you could also focus your outreach in some areas where you've seen the most change. So with that, I think I'll leave it right here. I hope that was helpful, and I'm very happy to take questions, of course, also.
Great, thank you so much. And yes, I'm actually glad that you brought up this question around Los Angeles. I was also very concerned when Eric had said, given some of the population shifts, that might lead to losing of seats in Los Angeles, because I think we just haven't done any of that analysis yet, either with census data or even the communities of interest testimonies that we, of course, are going to go out and receive. I'm going to open it up now to commissioners for questions that they might have for Eric, for Karin, about the ACS data that's been presented here, as well as potentially about any of the other data information that's been trickling through in the last day.
Just a couple of thoughts going into questions. I wanted to especially thank Eric and the Public Policy Institute for providing this analysis free of charge to the Commission, which is a very great gift to us and excellent work. Also to mention that we did alert our designated but not yet hired BRA analysts, Stormwasser, Witcher, Becker, about this presentation, and they are listening in as members of the public for now. But taking in with us what is, I think, our first look at actual population data. These are not the numbers that we're going to draw lines on. It is our first look at actual populations in California, and starting to get oriented towards areas to pay particular attention to and trends to notice. So wanted to mention those things.
Thank you, Commissioner Yee. Commissioner Fernandez, I saw you had a hand.
Actually, I was just gonna thank both Eric and Karin for this information, and I was just gonna ask Eric if he forgot to include Zone D. Is that that one's mine, obviously, but I just think it's very helpful, even though there are estimates. It's very, for me, it's helpful to see where the shifting has been. I mean, granted, we'll have the actual numbers shortly, as Karin is saying, but I think visually for me, because I've been reading, it's shifting, but it's actually nice when you drill it down to that level to, they'll say from LA to this area, but you actually drill down further. So thank you so much. This is very helpful for me.
Yeah, so the zoom ins were just for the sake of keeping it from the number of maps from getting too big. We just focused in on the very highest population centers of the state. But in the initial maps of the whole state, Zone D, which I believe is Sacramento and to the east, right? That's in there. It's you just have to kind of the PDF that I shared I've shared this presentation with the commission, and you should be able to zoom in pretty well and have the map still be pretty clear. So it's the maps in the PDFs are zoomable in that sense. So hopefully it'll be zoomable enough for you to get a sense of what's going on in Zone D. So I'm not trying to leave out any zones, just trying to present that whole state perspective, and then just hitting some highlights in some particular high population centers.
That's really helpful, and certainly in those large population centers, I think we'll have a lot of outreach work to do. That much of which we've already begun with a lot of our zone outreach work, of course. Other commissioners have thoughts or questions? Commissioner Fornashari?
So the changes in population that we're seeing on these maps are going to be reflected in the census data. Is that correct?
To the extent that they accurately reflect the changes that you're going to see in the census data, but as Karin pointed out, you don't know for sure until you get that file.
Right, because I'm just I live in just south of Stockton, and I'm just thinking about the COVID migration that's going on right now. That's not going to be reflected in the census data, which would I think change this map, maybe significantly. I don't know for sure, but yeah, just wondering where in time this data is from.
So yeah, so this is just, so the endpoint here is 2019, because we don't actually have the 2020 ACS yet. So it's even older than that. It's entirely pre-pandemic. So for sure, you don't want to say too much about how things might have changed between then and the time of the April 1st sort of census day. But also, anything that might have happened well after that as a result of the pandemic, for sure, there's lots of uncertainty here. This is just kind of presenting the latest detailed geographic data that we can get our hands on.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sinai?
You had mentioned military base on one of the maps. I'm guessing the military population is just looked as the general population as well, right? When we're looking at the changes of demographics here.
So yeah, I mean, they're going to show up wherever they are in the ACS data. And I believe, although I would defer to Karin on this question, I believe that they will be counted as in that location for the purposes of the enumeration as well. Because it's wherever you were on April 1st, right?
Yeah, Commissioner Sinai, I of course just sent you a document about that. So We can talk about that later, perhaps. But again, we need to think about these two data sets as really very separate. So the ACS really just has a completely different way of getting this information than the PL94, right? The PL94 is an in-person enumeration, and this is an estimated data set. So yeah, they just treat these samples differently and the data collection differently.
You know, I have a question actually, in general, perhaps for Karin, but also for my colleagues as well. I'm curious, do we anticipate that military bases and communities will be testifying as communities of interest? Do we have any sense of that happening in 2010? And I don't know that in my zone outreach that we've been doing any targeted outreach to such communities, but I'm wondering if that's something any other groups, any of the other zone outreach groups have been thinking about. Commissioner Sinek.
With San Diego being one of the largest, both active and veteran communities, we have done outreach to the veterans community. And I used to work with Blue Star families, so with military families. And so I have reached out to some of the organizations statewide and nationally who have done, who work with active military families and their spouses to see, how we can do some outreach in that area. And the San Diego Veterans Coalition is helping us connect with some of the statewide veterans organizations, and have offered to host a roundtable just so we can kind of share about redistricting. So it is on our radar for this time, and hopefully we will get some input, because it is critical. In San Diego, you've got Camp Pendleton, between San Diego and Orange County, you have Camp Pendleton, and it's there. And the other piece that's a lot of people don't realize is that over the last 10 years or maybe longer, military is no longer on bases, but they're living off base. So that's kind of different than how we think usually about military communities.
Yeah, and if I may add to that also, I don't recall that we had a whole lot of input in 2011 from that population. But just to echo what Commissioner Sinai said, on the local level, I have worked with a couple of jurisdictions where there was quite a bit of activity and people were really participating. And I think on some level, the California Voting Rights Act activity over the last 10 years in California, I think, is really going to help us, because there are more people now that understand and are really actively participating, I think, in districting and redistricting also, because this has really brought home that districts are essential to getting representation. So I'm really hoping that all of these people that have participated on the local level over the last 10 years can, be mobilized to some extent and will participate in this process also, and they will have some familiarity with it already.
Great, thank you so much for that. Commissioner Kennedy?
Yeah, I've reached out to the city of 29 Palms. 29 Palms is a location of a very large Marine Corps base, and most of the folks associated with the base live in and around 29 Palms. They had recently signed a contract with demographer for their municipal redistricting. So I reached out to them and said, we'd be interested in working with them to help people understand the differences between the municipal redistricting and statewide redistricting, et cetera. So I'm looking forward to hearing back from 29 Palms soon.
Thank you so much for that update. That's great and really exciting to hear about all of this outreach. Before we wrap up, any final thoughts or questions while we have both Eric and Karin here with us? Oh, Commissioner Yee.
Yeah, I just wanted to note for completeness, we didn't ask the report, we didn't ask Eric to include American Indian, Alaska Native, or Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander populations in these maps, basically because, at the Puma level, they're fairly small across the state, but I was just wondering if either Karin or Eric would like to say anything about either of those two groups as well, and anything we might note. Certainly, of course, we will pay great attention to all groups when we actually draw maps, and we encourage community of interest submissions from those groups as well as all other groups.
Yeah, so thank you, Commissioner Yee. I would say that on behalf of Haystack and Q2, we can't wait for your VRA Council to come on board and perhaps say to us, make some maps with the CVAP data and show us where these populations are on a smaller unit of analysis. So I think there will be, of course, I know there will be many, many maps in your future, but hopefully some demographic maps coming out of our shop your way. And they will, of course, include all of those population groups because we can map them on, again, a smaller unit of analysis, not as large as a Puma.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kennedy?
Thanks. I'm wondering if we can come up with some other terminology, because I really find the whole concept of losing districts to be something that is going to heighten tensions and really complicate our work. And I think that we really need to come up with a different way of expressing that. Everyone is going to be represented at the end of this process. And we don't want, even subconsciously, people feeling like they're not going to be represented. So I don't know, maybe we can't do it now, but I would like us to at least think about a way to avoid using the phraseology losing a district in any of our communications or documentation. I really find it problematic, and just, let's work together and see if we can come up with something else.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Kennedy. And I so agree with you on that point. And the couple times that I've already been asked that question, I've said, not as if we're going into the map and just erasing one district, right? We're taking a look holistically at the state. So I absolutely agree with you. Maybe that's, I know
I thought you might.
Yeah, I do. I know Freddie's here with us. Perhaps he can help come up with some great wording that we could use to really be thinking about and talking about and messaging this component of our work that, we're certainly not looking at the map and just there's just going to be complete erasure in one area or another, but instead a rethinking and a repurposing.
Gaining neighbors.
What was that, Christian?
Gaining neighbors.
Gaining neighbors. I like that. Yes, exactly. And I think this is a great opportunity to kind of think more creatively about just about the messaging on this for sure. Very good. Well, any final questions or comments? I think it was really helpful. This was a really helpful, just kind of first look at some of the data that we have available to us now. And certainly this is not the end of our analysis by any means of thinking about demographic change here in the Golden State. Commissioner Anderson.
I just have a quick question. When will the 2020 ACS data be out? Just for,
not until the end of, you'll have the actual enumeration by the time the 2020 ACS comes out. Yeah.
And just for also, everything that you've done here, that's based on the 2010 census geography. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
And the 2010 enumeration against the 2019 ACS. I will also say the ACS is great for a lot of. It asks a whole bunch of questions about people's lives that aren't in the enumeration. So it's very helpful from that perspective. Like anything about migration, for instance, comes from the ACS. But But as Karin has said, it's not what you do a redistricting with. So it's just kind of taking the most recent data we have available to us, basically.
Thank you.
Absolutely right. I use the ACS data quite a bit in much of my research because it's great because you can get a lot of different components of that capture a much larger picture of folks on the ground. But of course, it's still just an estimate based on survey data. All right, well, with that, I want to thank you both for being here today and sharing with us some of these first looks at the demographic changes here in California. Eric, it looks like you have a great puppy behind you there. So thank you for sharing your expertise as well as your pup. And thank you, Karin, as always, and I'm sure that we'll be talking more with you in the coming days and weeks about these demographic shifts and how that will influence our work. And with that, Commissioner Fernandez, I will pass it back to you.
Thank you. Great. Thank you. Thank you again, Eric and Karin. And so with that, we will be adjourning to closed session. But before we do that, I do want to take public comment one last time. So Katie, if you can read the instructions for public comment, please.
I can, Sharon. In order to maximize transparency and public participation in our process, the commissioners will be taking public comment by phone. To call in, dial the telephone number provided on the live stream feed. It is 877-853-5247. When prompted to enter a meeting ID number provided on the live stream feed, it is 981-9980-2683 for this meeting. When prompted to enter a participant ID, simply press the pound key. Once you have dialed in, you'll be placed in a queue. To indicate you wish to comment, please press star 9. This will raise your hand for the moderator. When it is your turn to speak, you will hear a message that says the host would like you to talk and to press star 6 to speak. If you would like to give your name, please state and spell it for the record. You are not required to provide your name to give public comment. Please make sure to mute your computer or live stream audio to prevent any feedback or distortion during your call. Once you are waiting in the queue, to be alert for when it is your turn to speak, and again, please turn down the live stream volume. And we do currently have one caller with their hand up, and I will be asking them to unmute.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Just want to confirm. Hello. This is Samuel Sukatan from the California League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. Last name spelled S-U, K as in Catherine, A as in Apple, T as in Thomas, O, N as in Nancy. First name Samuel, traditional spelling. Just wanted to reach out again, Chair Fernandez and members of the commission. So good to see you. Definitely appreciate this presentation. As you know, that we're very focused on natural and built geography. So it's very interesting to see how people are moving over kind of our own kind of community of interest. Wanted to bring back a couple conversations that came up in this morning. We worked before the last commission and Filkins-Weber's comment about reaching compromises with organizations. Do want to emphasize, I think there might be a misunderstanding about folks that are lobbying the commission for electoral purposes and folks that are lobbying the commission around representation. And like, I just want to emphasize, like, there are different people with different agendas. We're here over we are the Lorax. We speak for the trees, and you've seen some of our presentations around bears and communities around them. So just wanted to flag that in addition to kind of rolling in kind of our support for a January deadline, because again, while trees don't speak, people that love them do, and getting the call over Christmas is going to be a little difficult. So wanted to just bring attention to our support of the IVE Redistricting Alliance's letter about a 128 deadline and a 621 primary if necessary. But again, I know there's more conversation going on. Very happy to be here. I'm actually fielding a lot of reapportionment questions from folks in the environmental community myself, so this is very helpful that we're not losing a district. We're just getting to know a new and different set of neighbors. I really appreciate. I think it was Commissioner Fornaciari who brought that up. But I know you're going to closed session. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and I'm sure we'll see some of you tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sukatan. And I think that was Commissioner Yee that talked about getting to know your neighbors. I really like that. So thank you so much.
Terribly sorry. Thank you, Commissioner Yee.
Yeah, thanks.
And that was our only caller at this time.
Okay, great. So let's take a 15-minute break. And as I mentioned, we will be adjourning to closed session. We will not be coming back to open session as a full commission until Thursday. We do have a public input design committee meeting tomorrow, Wednesday at 4 o'clock. So with that, if everybody can be back at 4:10. Thank you.